Welcome to this edition of Backstage Pass with Lia Chang. I'm your host, Lia Chang. Today, I'm celebrating the Year of the Snake, and what I need on the first day of the Year of the Snake is my Pocket Chinese Almanac 2025, which is translated and annotated by Joanna C. Lee and Ken Smith. My dear friend Spike, and of course, my fabulous good luck pork dumplings. After my dumpling and fried turnip cake feast, I headed down to the Lynn F. Angelson Theater in the East Village for AANHPI night of the world premiere of Andrea Thome's modern verse translation of Shakespeare's Cymbeline, presented by NAATCO in partnership with On Shakespeare. Thome's update features an all-femme, all-Asian American cast and design team led by Amy Hill in the title role. The cast includes Purva Bedi, Annie Fang, Anna Ishida, Naria Kong, Jennifer Lim, KK Moggie, Maria-Christina Oliveras, Juliana Stolstio, Sarah Suzuki, and Gina Yee. Stephen Brown Fried directs.
The experience. So Mia, this is one of the. Usually, in my experience as a director, like I'm thinking about plays for a long time, and you're pitching them to producers and trying to, have them stick. And this was one of the rare instances where a producer came to me and was like, "You interested in this play?" And I never really thought about it. And you pitched Cymbeline to me, and I was like, "Oh, let me give it a look." And I was rereading the play, and as I was rereading Cymbeline, I had read it, but not really engaged with it deeply for a while. I had this very visceral experience when I hit a lot of it, but particularly the Giacomo Imogen stuff. And as I was reading the Giacomo Imogen stuff, I was sort of overwhelmed with this feeling of like not wanting to watch that and thinking like, oh, I don't want to. I find that when you're putting dynamics on stage like that, even if you intellectually know that you're putting something on stage that is not to be glorified, it can be sometimes almost impossible to put it on stage without, in some way or to some degree, sort of making the thing scintillating or making it sort of somehow attractive in a way. And I was like, I don't want to do that. What I do want to do is put something on stage that will enable us to really look at the dynamics of what's going on here and think about the dynamics at play across gender in this play. But I don't want to kind of replicate an experience of trauma in the very work of art I'm building. And so I started thinking, oh, well, what, maybe if this was all femme identified, which is not, I also want to be very clear, certainly violence occurs between people of the same gender. So just putting in a female identifying character who disguises themselves as a male character in order to go off into some other universe is something that happens very commonly in Shakespeare. And when I see, to me, that's a convention. In Shakespeare's day, the entire company would have been male identifying actors. And that convention of that cross that happens so frequently in Shakespearean comedies, to me, really only makes sense in a theatrical world in which costumes and the theatrical conventions are what are creating gender. Whenever I see a production where the actors are cast as the gender of the characters and then they do that switch, I'm always just, it never, I never buy it. It takes me out of the play. It's something that to me very much came out of Shakespeare's world, where it was all one gender of performers on stage. So in a way, for me, the way we approached it feels actually like a more traditional approach to the play than if we were to cast it with actors whose gender identities matched those of their characters.
So then, when you were talking about I'm curious about the conversations that happened then, because I recall putting you guys together for you to explain all of this to Stephanie, who has done miraculous things on several productions with NAATCO. Actually, we've thrown a lot of projects at her where, okay, so it's an all transgender cast and it's all Asian American. Go, you know. But so how do you describe for me the process then of synthesizing all of that information in terms of your selection process?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing was I was invited to an early reading of it, and I felt like, and Stephen and I had a chance to chat there, and I just felt like there's such joy in the sort of irreverence that the actors could take with this idea. There was just such joy, and I just feel like it caught fire. Like I just felt like it was just so like you could just tell that the actors just chewed on it and enjoyed it so much. And so I think it was just a thing that we sort of took on faith and then look at the cast we ended up with. It's just so delicious. So I think that was it. And then that's it.
Well, then I kind of would love to hear from you guys in terms of what went through your heads when it was an all-femme. I mean, my first reception of that is like, well, you know, in Shakespeare's time, they were all men doing every single part. And, you know, if I were being true to NAATCO's mission in terms of offering opportunities to Asian American actors who don't get a chance to do most of these plays, and also in Cymbeline, there are only two women, right? It's Imogen and the Queen. And that's it.
And like Dorothy and, you know, her various...
Helen and the usual like peons and stuff, yeah. So, sorry, so, you know, so it's kind of true to the mission because these are roles that these actresses would never be able to play, so why not? So in terms of your processes with this kind of, like, because you got, especially, well, Jennifer and KK have played many different roles. We had 2 workshops of the play. So, you know, switching the roles back and forth to figure out what exactly, and they ended up playing roles that they never played in the workshops.
we both, the first thing we both sort of said was, we're far too old and jaded to you know, so that was the challenge for us.
Yes. Young lovers in love.
Oh, so long ago.
But also in keeping with the fairy tale aspect that you spoke about in the play, we got to a point where we actually said, never mind age appropriateness. You know, it's already inappropriate to begin with. So let's just embrace the inappropriateness of it and go. MC, you have anything?
We're ageless. Asian don't crazy. I mean, when I heard it, I was like, yes, and. You know, why not? It didn't really cross my mind to say no, like why? Like why? You know, it's like, yes.
But I think the stronger thing in my little experience in this that I thought was really lovely was by really, I'm choosing the wrong word, but demystifying or getting rid of all of those things, it really afforded us to lean in and just focus on the language and focus on the actual translation, which I think Andrea did a really fantastic job with.
And really just telling the story, you know, I mean, I felt like we could sort of delve a little bit deeper into what, you know, an example would be that the Giacomo Imogen bedroom scene, you know, and also the scene before when Giacomo first comes to court. Sort of this idea of like, well, what's really happening here? You know, how far do we take this? What does it mean? You know, that and I mean, as an actress who I guess, you know, was playing Imogen in those 2 scenes, like I felt very safe and very much able to be open to how creepy can we make this? How believably, sort of insidious, and all those things. And it was a great way to explore all those things. That I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it would have been different, I think, if it was a man playing that role, and so there was
Similarly to Clotton.
with Clotton, right? Yes. But throughout, it has felt the process, and I only speak for myself, but the process has felt very open, and everybody sort of leaning in and embracing, and just there was never I don't think at any point I ever thought also why not. It was just like yes and exactly as MC said. I think it's so.
And MC, you played a woman and a man.
Yes, I love the doubling of this. I mean,
So good.
male, female, mother, father, but it just shows, we contain all of the things and just tap into the different aspects and expand from there. And they're also like the complete antithesis of each other in so many ways, like the moral center, who, kidnapping kids, but it's retribution. But again, complicated, right? And similarly, the queen comes from a place of complete, deep, misplaced belief that power, ambition will satiate her, and the crown, she will do everything for it. So that's just so delicious to play two seemingly opposite. Like the queen to me is the height of capitalism in this moment, right? And stepping into that and wanting that so desperately, and then someone else who's completely forsaken that and is really holding true to spirituality and nature and his sons, and well, not his sons, right? Again, complicated. So that doubling, I thought it's really delicious, and I'm so deeply grateful to explore both of them.
If I may, in terms of the challenges we handed to Stephanie and TBD, I think finding an actor who could handle either the Queen or Belarius would have been like a tall order, because they're both like immensely, complex roles. Putting them together, and part of the delight of it for me was that polar opposite attribute of them. But that also then became this additional challenge of like finding the person who could actually nail both of them, and it was so exciting when I was
In the acting and the directing, actually, did you ever talk about what it's like to play a man, or was that ever a part of the conversation?
Well, I'm curious to hear. Well, I'm gonna shut up. You go first.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I will say, we did I would say in the second workshop that we did, which was the first time I read Posthumous, at one point, which was also hugely sort of self-effacing, but at one point Stephen said, "Just be you," and I was like, oh. And it was like hugely vulnerable, but also really just unlocked everything. And then it was interesting. It was almost as though, it's like the core and the center is really what it is, and then gender is really almost irrelevant. Really, it's just actually the character.
That's what drives. What
drives
you, what the wants are,
exactly.
the needs, and the.
But I do think one of the really important things that I learned is, men and women do function differently. Men and women do have different expectations from society, and there are certain things that I just couldn't tap into, that I needed a man's point of view to remind me, like, hey, sometimes it's not always about love. Sometimes it's about honor. Sometimes it's about, there are certain things that I think as women we prioritize, men we prioritize differently. And that was really interesting. So it was less about finding the physical attributes and more about finding the center of the character.
I feel like, particularly in Shakespeare's world, because the female identifying characters have to navigate an existence with many more constrictions. They develop many more attributes of savvy than the male characters often. And I feel like the conversations that KK is, I feel like I was often sort of watching the female identifying cast navigating things more savvily than I thought men would actually be able to navigate. So I was also thinking, I'm just particularly like, oh, like actually as a man, like I would not be able to handle this as sophisticatedly as you're currently handling it. In terms of like, the only reason I think in the second workshop that we were at that point was that in the first workshop, I came into that first workshop thinking like, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to get to like explore all of these like ideas of gender and construction. And at the beginning, I think we really leaned into trying to play different ideas of gendered archetypes in the play, and we actually found it really took us astray, and it really took us away from the specificity of the language, and so you couldn't actually hear the scenes. And it was only once we said, oh, let's drop all of that and just actually approach this the same way we'd approach any role, with an attention to specificity and the moment-to-moment detail of what you're saying, that things started to actually come alive. And I think it also, in a way, like gender, yes, there are different ways that different genders, but also there's such a massive spectrum of what types of identities might identify themselves as male identifying, and what types of identities might identify themselves as femme identifying, that like at a certain point, what is what and what is what, I just don't know even where it all falls.
Yeah. Did you have a hard time, Stephanie, casting this?
No. It was a really great idea, and I think a lot of people, for that reason, were really interested in coming in for it and being considered for it, and so that feels like a bounty. And then I think something that Stephen does really well in the room is just meet the actor where they are, and so I always appreciate that direction, which starts with, I think, how I'm receiving what you're doing is this, and so from this place can we do that. And I think that's just such a helpful and healthy way and approach to the audition itself, because it just obviously just level sets everything, and so I think we got more out of the actors in the room, so there was just more room to succeed. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of like, it ended up, I don't know, is there more? I think that's it, right? That's it, right? It was great. It's been really great, and I'm so happy to see it, and because it was just so, it was more than I could have imagined all the times imagining it.
That's great. Yeah.
But is there more, Ian?
No, I mean, I agree that it was like so many incredible people. I think that the hardest part was the puzzle. Was like, once you lose those restrictions on like age and gender, like you look at everyone and you're like, they could all do everything.
I know.
And
It was fun.
version of
It was
that?
a lot of fun.
Yeah, the Tetris of that really like benefits our production. Yeah.
Shall we open it up to anyone who has comments, questions, dirty jokes?
I was curious about the choreography for the fight scenes. I was just curious about the genesis of the scar. Yeah, and it was really beautiful. And just curious how that came about.
So specifically for the war. And
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
Yeah. So we had a wonderful collaborator, Alex Might, who's Chicago-based and is now sadly back in Chicago, so she can't be with us tonight. And in our first conversation, I didn't know what the war was going to look like, but all I said to Alex is, I said, like, I do a lot of Shakespeare in my career, and I said, and I'm just sick of watching people run on stage with like swords and banging them together, and if I have to sit through that again, I'm gonna scream. And I said, it's like, I don't know what the war is, but I know I don't want it to be that. And so she said,
he had to do 4 wars for us in Henry VI.
Henry VI also. Like,
more.
after Henry VI, I was like, no more of that. And Alex said, well, let me see the other design. And Alex started looking at what the other designers, in particular the scenic designer, Aunt Ma, was developing. And Alex was so smart and said, it seems like fabric is becoming this sort of dominant metaphor in this production. What if fabric becomes our means of combat? And what if all the war is developed out of fabric? And I was like, oh my God, you're hired. It's great, do it. So, and really, I mean, Alex deserves complete credit for developing that idea for the combat, and I just couldn't have been more thrilled with where she got with it.
I was also surprised, like speaking about the choreography, I was surprised. I mean, we talked about instruments and singing, but we didn't like audition singing and instrument. I mean, I had
Well,
it worked. I was thrilled. I was like,
sometimes you get incredibly lucky because Sarah and Annie, who the whole cast sang beautifully, but you know, Sarah and Annie had to really start it out and sing that duet. We didn't ask them a single question about their singing abilities when we cast them. They were just cast. And then it came time to sing. I was like, oh, who can sing? I was like, oh, I can kind of carry a tune. And they sang, I was like, oh, we just lucked out. That could have been really hard, and we were very lucky.
And then
Yeah.
And in particular, Maria, I was like, well, they're starting to sing, so Maria better sing something. It was just really gorgeous.
So I just had a question about, like, mainly for the actors. It's right now in my acting class we're talking a lot about like this idea of like women in history having to drive from the passenger seat and like the mental tactics that they have to use. So I was wondering, like, going back and forth with the idea of gender construct and you know, swimming in between the lines of what it is in Shakespeare's world and what it can be. I was wondering what it felt like to dip into a power that wasn't explicitly masculine or feminine, but just a dynamic of power. I just was really interested if you elaborate on that.
When you say dynamic of power, not void of gender, can you just unpack that a little bit, like as far as like a non-binary owning?
Yes, like allowing so many things happen dynamically, like with between the social constructs and class constructs and even just like very intimate relationships. I was wondering, like, when you remove gender from a play that can be considered very gendered, from a playwright who can be considered very gendered, what did it feel like? What was there a period of time where you had to be like, oh, now I'm discovering something that I'm drawing on that I never noticed before, or just parts of the process?
It's interesting. I mean, we didn't really sort of tap into gender that much, but I do remember saying something to Jen very early on where I was like, it's really nice to play a role where I can just lean into my anger or lean into whatever it is. And oftentimes, particularly, maybe not so much now, but I'm thinking maybe 10, 20 years ago, especially when I was in a different age bracket, going out, there is a part of you that, that age-old thing, don't be so angry. You gotta be likable. Da-da-da-da-da-da. All of these things that you hear that just was not a part of the conversation, that I could just go. Whereas previously was like, yes, I know you got a lot of power, but you're a small Asian woman. So now, so it was really nice to feel like that was not something I had to be concerned with ever. It was more about whether I was too emotionally savvy or whether I was too, leaning into those actual masculine energies or qualities that we all have, but as society dictates us to temper down. I didn't have to do that time. And there was something really lovely about that, if that helps your question.
Yeah. I can only say from my perspective, I did not disregard their gender. If anything, character-wise, and this is from my actor process point of view, and it's from the text, right? Whatever Shakespeare gives you, you are what you say and what other people say about you, right? So you've got to look at all the details, like the Queen, spoken about quite a bit, right? But she's smart though. She knows how to play a room. She's manipulative. She's also based on like the archetypal villain, Snow White's queen. So within what you're asking, like the constructs of these worlds, I know, she knows what she has to do in a room. She knows how to play the king, right? So she uses her feminine wiles. At one point at the end, says, oh, cooing and la la la, Cornelius when he comes in, right? So it's, as my approach to both of them, right? Same thing with Belarius, right? He was a warrior, right? So I took a look at archetypes of warriors and men who like I could engage with, right? I mean, everything's about power. Every scene is about power on some level. And his power was over his boys, but then not. right, and taken away, and getting away from the power of the court, right? So, and in a masculine, right, like in a, you know, what KK says so beautifully about masculine, we all got it, we all have it. That's why, and I've played men before, but I never really thought about them as men. They were just me, and you can put whatever you want on me, right, and I'll bring the man. I mean, and not to be like crass, but like cojones, right? It's like, oh, I got cojones now. Fantastic, awesome. And there is, though, speaking to your question about like gender construct, and then this doubles down on what KK said, there is something so freeing. I think I said this actually at the audition. I was like, oh, it's nice to walk around all difference, you know, as a white man with a big, in America. It is. There was something so delicious and powerful about that, right? Yeah, I'm a little Puerto Rican girl, you know what I'm saying? But that's what's inside me, you know? So as far as gender construct, you know, I love your question, but like as far as, again, I can only speak for my own process. You can't, I couldn't leave their gender out of their embodiment, if that makes sense. But smarter, yeah, and navigate. And Shakespeare's women, all deference to whoever, are smarter, just in the canon, than all the men, even though they were played by men, right? And Shakespeare knew that. So I just, you know, offer that. There are ways to kind of work within the structures and subvert.
Thank you. Did you want something? Because I was going to say, maybe we have time for one more question.
Oh, well, just one thought on Shakespeare. There's a really, if you're interested, there's a fascinating essay that I think informs some of the thinking that kind of, by 20th century Shakespeare scholar Jan Ka, and he has this essay, Shakespeare's Bitter Arcadia, and something he writes about that I found so interesting is that when the sort of pants rolls happen in Shakespeare, and you have a male character or a female character who transforms into a young boy, he writes about that it wasn't actually as simple as that the character was switching over to male gender, but rather that because it was a male actor who had been under costume to be a female character and was then shedding that costume, they were actually achieving a kind of hybrid gender, and in a way, and that's why they have names like Ganymede, which is the play where it becomes Ganymede. Yeah. That in a way, when that happens, the character is becoming the sort of romantic ideal by transcending gender. And so to me, there's a way that Shakespeare was actually thinking about gender in ways that we have lost the ability to.
Thank you for joining me for this edition of Backstage Pass with Lia Chang. Until next time.